I welcome you all to the second edition of the monthly capacity building training series, hosted by Center for 21st Century Issues, an NGO responding to the challenges of the 21st century. My name is Odediji Jumoke Victoria, the Program Officer for C21st, and also the officer in charge of the Committee of Practice, which is a platform on climate finance and Green Climate Fund. And it The platform was formed in the last quarter of year 2020, and the platform is to further engage with climate finance and the Green Climate Fund processes in Nigeria. So once again, I welcome you all to the February edition of the training series. Shared on the screen is the agenda to guide us through the training for today. Please note that a link will be shared in the chat box, which contains the attendance form for all participants to fill. Thank you. So on the agenda, I have the opening remark by Ms. Titi Lope Akosa, who is the Executive Director for Center for 21st Century Issues. So I would be welcoming Ms. Akosa to give her opening remark.
Yeah, thank you, Jumoke. Good evening, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are all over the world. This is another series of our capacity building that we all have agreed to based on the popular demand by members of the community of practice. You will recall that towards the end of 2021, we had a meeting where we all agreed that every month we should be addressing the issues of climate finance and the GCF, and to help all our members to understand the Green Climate Fund more, and also to understand a lot around climate finance. So today we're having the second edition. We've had the January edition, and the second edition is devoted to addressing the GCF CSOs engagement. So we want to look at how civil society organizations have been engaging the GCF. What does it mean for us as civil society also to engage the Green Climate Fund processes at the international level and at country levels? So this afternoon, we are going to have Ms. Tara Daniels of WIDO to explain this to us. Ms. Tara Daniels is the alternate active observer for the Global North for CSOs in the Green Climate Fund. So for us today, we have somebody who have been part of the GCF CSOs Observer Group, who understands the working of civil society around the GCF, and who will be able to answer any questions that you are going to pose to her concerning how GCF engage with the, how civil society organizations engage with the GCF processes. So this afternoon, I welcome Mr. Daniels to our platform, the Community of Practice on the Green Climate Fund and Climate Finance for Women in Nigeria. Thank you very much, Mr. Tara Daniels, for accepting our invitation to talk to us, to explain to us, to teach us more about how civil society can engage with the GCF processes. So I'm happy this evening or this afternoon that we have our members who are here. They are eager to learn from you and to hear more from you. Thank you very much. You are all welcomed.
Thank you, Ma, for the opening remark. Next on the agenda is a presentation on the topic CSOs engagement with GCF processes. And that would be done by Tara Daniel, who is the Senior Program Manager for Women's Environment and Development Organization, WIDO. So Tara Daniel, she Okay, she leads the Widow's portfolio of work on feminist climate finance, support women's participation and leadership in the climate negotiations, and advocates for gender-responsive climate policies, particularly with working with the women and gender constituency. Sarah draws from an interdisciplinary background, including dual master's degree in Sustainable Development and Conservation Biology, MS, and Public Policy, MPP, from the University of Maryland for feminist analysis and advocacy. I would like to welcome Tara Daniel to deliver a presentation. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm waiting for the ability to share my screen. It looks like all participants need to be enabled to share screens in order for me to do that. And I am excited to talk to you about engaging with the GCF as civil society, in part because as TT introduced, indeed, I am an alternate active observer in the GCF Civil Society Network, which we'll talk about what that is in just a moment. And I wanted to go ahead and, excuse me, that's not what I wanted to do, to my slideshow view so that I can show you all of the different ways there are of engaging, because I think there are many different ways to think about engagement with the GCF. It depends on your particular interests and also your particular skills, whether you're more interested in the policy side of things or in really understanding electronic and in-person discussions, to collaborate and to comment on all of the GCF's policymaking and decision-making processes that we know about. There is some level of transparency that's needed by the GCF for us to put in our input and to be able to contribute our technical expertise. But we've really positioned ourselves to make sure that this network prioritizes and ensures the voices of communities impacted by climate change, and that rights holders are particularly heard as the fund is deliberating how to move forward with both its policies and its projects. We use a variety of different means to do this work, and I'll be presenting several of those. It's important to note that there's also a space within this observer network specifically for South-South collaboration though. This is a separate listserv. Even though I'm an alternate active observer helping to create and coordinate a lot of the work within this network right now, there's a current election going on. I may not be alternate active observer in a few months, but I'll still be contributing to the observer network as much as I can. I don't have access to the South-South listserv. It is truly a South-South listserv that is run and operated by the Southern colleagues as an additional part of this network. And any conversations and collaboration that's happening in that space is brought back into the larger network, which is a network of North-South solidarity, to make sure that those opinions and viewpoints and information is fully incorporated and integrated into any of our positions in advocacy. So we have this broad observer network for engaging in the GCF, and we have the South-South listserv, and we also have what we'll talk about a little bit later, some other civil society initiatives that all coordinate and communicate in some way or another with this larger observer network. There are 6 principles by which the Observer Network operates. And I've hyperlinked this, and I'll be providing the copy of the presentation to all participants so that you can take advantage of the links in the material. And I wanted to use that to open the principles document directly. This is a site we'll talk about a little bit later called GCF Watch at gcfwatch.org. But this is where the principles document is available in English, in French, and in Spanish to speak to the fact that we want the network to be as accessible as possible. Unfortunately, the network does not have any resources of its own, so we can't always provide interpretation or translation of all the materials that are worked on. And it's important to note that the GCF itself, unfortunately, works in English, and very few of its overall operations are interpreted or translated into other languages. I want us to just spend a few minutes with the English summary of the principles document because it speaks to the ways that the GCF Observer Network works very fundamentally. And this is a document that, as I said, will be hyperlinked so that you can see more information on it. So we work in solidarity. We have a collaborative work process to make sure that everything that we do is done in a really collective nature. We prioritize and elevate the voices of communities, particularly those that are where the GCF projects are happening. And those that should be receiving and having funding from the GCF, and to make sure that we use any sort of mechanisms that we have, such as the active observers who can sometimes speak during board meetings, that they're using their voice to elevate these voices. We work in a really transparent manner. That means that all of the advocacy and positions that we are working on are shared widely across the entire Observer Network. There's never a small group that is coming up with language that is submitted without a chance for everyone to input. Of course, not everyone has the capacity to input on everything, but it's really amazing seeing the ways in which drafts of advocacy positions are shared across hundreds of people to make sure that everyone is aware of what's being said so that we can really speak on behalf of the full network. We have an inclusive process to make sure that it's civil society, Indigenous peoples, and local communities, and that we're upholding our values of climate justice and equity, human rights, and gender equality. Part of this means that those that participate in the Observer Network do not have to be official accredited observers to the GCF. We recognize that that process can be a very bureaucratic process, and that only organizations with a certain level of capacity to submit, for example, financial and legal information may be able to become observers, and that process is not constantly open. So any civil society actor who wants to engage with the network and who agrees to these values can do so. We operate with independence.
Hello, Tara. Sorry,
yes.
Hello, Tara. Kindly admit people into the platform. Some people are waiting. I think here they've transferred the whatever to you. Please just check. Have you seen it?
Okay, I've admitted everyone. Yes, I'm going to go ahead and make you co-host though, so you can do that.
Okay, thank you.
PT, you can make someone co-host in order. Well, no, it seems like right now I can only make you host. But what I can do is I can change the sharing option so that I can participate as a participant. And that should allow me to continue sharing even as I transfer the hosting over to you.
Okay, that would be nice.
Yeah, all right. So sorry, your name just keeps moving as more people keep joining as I'm trying to make you host. You're host now, and I'm still screen sharing. So there we are. We operate with independence in the network. We are not financially tied to the Green Climate Fund in and of itself. We want to make sure that we're independently monitoring and being a watchdog, so that we are not influenced by the GCF, but seek to influence the GCF with our values. We work with a lot of structure that is non-hierarchical. As alternate active observer, for instance, I don't have any greater authority or voice in this process. Instead, I have a few more coordination responsibilities in terms of organizing meetings or inputs and contributing to analyses. And anyone can contribute to leading advocacy or work or developing analyses on specific projects or policies. Anyone can do that. The people that speak at the board meeting are the elected active observers, and those are elected by all of the other actors in this process. So here's some of the participants at the board meeting, and then the active observers can provide more information and access to the listserv, and anyone with access to the listserv can be a part of the GCF Observer Network. Membership really is about participation in the listserv and taking advantage of opportunities coordinated through that listserv for input. So let's go back and talk just a little bit more about this process. So as we look here at the 6 principles, I want to move on to the key accomplishments of this group over time. So we do have I apologize. It seems that I lost connectivity for a minute there. I'm going to reshare my screen so that we can continue. So we coordinated the board meetings, preparatory meetings, where we review every item on the agenda for every board meeting to prepare any sort of input and positions, and to figure out over days at a time. Sometimes these are 3-day meetings when they have in-person board meetings, exactly what should be said, and then sharing that information more broadly, again, over the entire listserv, to make sure that individuals are able to, it looks like someone is drawing on this. Unfortunately, I don't know how to stop that, but hopefully it won't show up on the next slide. We also have established that the network gets a meeting directly with the executive director and his secretariat staff, where we can ask questions, and we've been doing that for many board meetings now, and this is an established time in order to really advocate for things that may not be on the agenda of the actual board meetings, to make sure that we have additional space for things that we're concerned about in overall GCF operations. We've influenced and shaped key policies, including the environmental and social policy and the Indigenous peoples policy, and included best practice recommendations in the way that those policies have worked. Oh, unfortunately, it does seem like that drawing is going to stay from slide to slide. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and then reshare in order to see if we can get a clean version. All right, there we are. Some additional accomplishments of this group are limited, because even though we provide civil society input on all of the projects that are proposed to the Green Climate Fund. We've seen some success with improvement of some projects, but it's not that every comment that we make for project improvement is really taken on. Most of this success has been on understanding that when programs, which are big collections of multiple projects, are approved, that there should be more oversight and conditions tied to the sub-projects rather than just the overall big program that could be implemented in as many as 40 different countries. We have occasionally been successful in pushing back against projects that the GCF board has been considering approving for millions of dollars that are just wrong. Our key success in this area has been a biofuel project from a few years ago. And we really drew on the technical expertise across our network, including from people that don't necessarily engage at every board meeting. And I think that's another thing that's key, is understanding that there are so many different ways of engaging, and it might be waiting until there is a project that requires your particular technical expertise or a particular advocacy moment that seems right for you to contribute to the network. We've had some limited information disclosure gains, but we're still really fighting for more information. So to have full information on what the projects are, including all of the annexes that are submitted to the GCF, should be publicly available, and we've won that. The Secretariat was reviewing all of the projects and then not providing that information publicly, except to the board members. That's now public information, but it's only for the public projects and not for the private projects. A big win, of course, is ensuring that all the gender assessment and gender action plans that were being prepared and submitted to the GCF Secretariat are now also shared publicly, so that we can have greater accountability as civil society to what these accredited entities are implementing on the ground with their projects. Overall, a key piece of this has been setting expectations. Accredited entities are concerned about what the GCF Observer Network will say about their project. They will meet with the GCF Observer Network. They will expect that our comments will be critical if the project merits it. So they really are looking to answer our questions and to engage so that we can contribute to this process of ensuring that the highest quality projects are approved by the GCF. I wanted to give an example of, this is from 2020. I haven't compiled the 2021 numbers yet, of all of the different types of policies, all of the different operational aspects of the GCF, where the GCF Observer Network has had input and has made submissions. This includes the overall GCF strategic plan. It includes the operating procedures of the independent redress mechanism, which is a crucial part of the GCF, because this is the space where where any complaint can be made about a project. We've seen input, particularly on the information disclosure policy, which has not yet been updated, but will be updated. And obviously, we had many things to say about what information should be disclosed earlier and more fully. We were able to feed back onto the independent integrity units operations as they thought about how they can remedy the things that are reported to them. And again, another opportunity where we compiled input was how the board looks at the reports of the independent redress mechanism, when the independent redress mechanism points out the ways in which there have been violations of policies, of human rights, environmental policies, etc., how the board should deal with that when it comes to projects and programs. There have been some sub-projects of a particular fund called the Abaro Fund, which is focused on, unfortunately, monoculture plantations. And we've been able to provide feedback on each of those sub-projects. And the independent redress mechanism was also looking at their particular gender strategy separate from the overall GCF gender policy. So these are all different examples of ways that come up through the GCF Observer Network where you might have interest or expertise and can contribute and say, these are our thoughts and comments that should be taken into consideration for your operations. Wanted to also highlight some other civil society initiatives that connect with the Observer Network, but are run and particularly resourced by various actors. One, we briefly visited the GCF Watch website. If we have some time, I'm happy to look at it later, particularly during questions, recognizing that this is a Southern-led initiative. And what the GCF Watch website does is it contains all of the information that is publicly available through the GCF, but it will also, for example, on individual projects, post what the civil society comments were, what the Observer Network position was, and how they stated their position at the board meeting. And also will provide all of the CSO comments and these submissions that we've been making, such as those that I mentioned before. Each regional node has a particular coordinator because they're also trying to collect news and resources on this site so that it can become a site for more engagement. We also have the GCF regional gender groups. Titia Kosa is the regional GCF gender monitor for Anglophone Africa, one of the 4 regions covered by these groups, which focus on the capacity building of women's rights advocates. So this work is very similar because it is feeding into the overall comments and positions of the GCF Observer Network, but it provides us a specific focal space for folks that might be coming from a gender space that are not as engaged in climate work. And it provides a particular space to really focus on the gender work of the GCF as well, before feeding all of these perspectives and expertise into the larger network positions. There's a civil society project that has been implemented by German Watch and Care for many years with support from various regional organizations to ensure that likewise there's a lot of understanding of how the GCF works and operates. The publication listed here is a great primer to understand how the GCF operates. Similarly, the publication shown here, which I actually do need to hyperlink those before I share this presentation so that you can connect directly to those publications, outlines the different ways that civil society can engage with the GCF. So these are much longer publication form versions of this presentation in many ways. So as we look toward engagement, I wanted to highlight that there are some particular issues coming up in 2022. We're going to talk about sector guidance in a few minutes. There's also an update of the simplified approval process that the GCF Observer Network has been contributing to with comments and even bilateral meetings with board members for many years now. Hopefully that will get resolved in 2022. This update to the information disclosure policy for which we've submitted comments. We hope to really be vocal, particularly with board members about what we hope to see in that update. There's ongoing development of the GCF's own environmental and social safeguards, a new version of that because the ones that they've been using were adopted from another institution. There's a review of observer participation so that we can really look at the spaces in which we would like to have more voice and authority and hopefully not lose any voice or authority. For example, the active observers can speak during the GCF board members, but it's at the discretion of the co-chairs to call on them. Sometimes we're not called upon to speak and to share these jointly developed positions that the Observer Network has worked on until after the decision has been taken. So we know that in those cases, unfortunately, there's no way for our comments to influence any of the board members at that point. So looking forward to making sure that we improve the ways in which observers can participate in these decision-making processes. We'll also see the second performance review work will start this year, and there's going to start to be a conversation about replenishment toward the end of the year, with next year being a key year for replenishing the Green Climate Fund with the billions of dollars that it needs to fully operate. I wanted to highlight these 3 sector guides. Their input is due a week from now, but we've been reviewing sector guides for over a year now. The GCF releases a few of them at a time, and right now it's released these particular 3, excuse me, on water security, health and well-being, and low emission transport, excuse me. And this is an opportunity to provide feedback onto how the GCF ultimately should be providing guidance to accredited entities on what types of projects they want to see, what types of projects are the best, what are the elements of these projects, how should gender be considered in these projects, how should local communities be considered. So if you have any particular expertise in any of these areas of water security, health and well-being, or low emission transport, or just generally interested, these documents will take you directly to the GCF Observer Network. You see this is a joint commons document here. What you do is you sign up to put your name and your organization and your email. So then in case the coordinator wants to email everyone and make some comments, there's a link to the actual guide right there. So you can read what the GCF has proposed as their draft guide. And then you can go through and list what section or page number and what your comments are. The active observer team will then compile all of these comments to make sure that they are not duplicated and are all presented in order, and that they are combined and more robust where the same people, or where different people have made the same comment over and over. And I think this is a really important effort, especially as we also turn these into overarching comments about what the GCF should be doing in these spaces. So I'm going to go back to the presentation now and look at some other, just the direct ways to engage with the GCF Observer Network. And then we're going to spend just a little bit of time on the GCF website. So you can join the GCF Observer Network, which has a listserv. You may already be part of this listserv. If you are not part of it and would like to be, you can contact either the Active Observer for Developing Countries, Eileen, or the Active Observer for Developed Countries. It doesn't matter which one you contact, but they are the folks that add people to the listserv and ensure that you're a civil society actor. Eileen can directly add people to the South-South listserv that I mentioned. As I said before, you do not have to be accredited as an observer. And I want to be really careful when I say that, because we talk about accreditation a lot in terms of accredited entities to the GCF. And that is not what this is. This is observer organizations can be accredited to the GCF and receive that formal recognition by the GCF that they are following those operations. These are the observer organizations that will get the direct link in case there's an in-person meeting again in order to register. But there are always organizations within the observer network who don't want to fill out that paperwork, and it can be very annoying paperwork. And there's only certain times of the year that you can do it. And it's not necessary, even if you we're wanting to join an in-person GCF board meeting as an observer, another observer network organization may be able to sponsor you and register you. We have the GCF 31st board meeting coming up at the end of March. We will be doing a series of virtual preparatory meetings, walking through every single agenda item on that meeting, talking about the issues, and then assigning small groups to develop the analyses and the positions that that the active observers will voice during the board meeting. This will be 4 to 5 days of 2-hour preparatory meetings. Since we're trying to have them, usually it's early in the morning for North America and Latin America, midday for Africa and Europe, so that we can catch late evening times for our Asia and Pacific colleagues who want to participate in those virtual meetings. And then the other way of engaging in general that I think is really important is just to recognize how to know what's going on with the GCF. And so I wanted to spend just a few minutes looking at the GCF website before and how to file a complaint if needed. So you file a complaint through the independent redress mechanism if there's a project or in your area that you are affected by, or a reconsideration of for funding proposal. But since I don't think any of us have been directly involved with the funding proposals, it makes more sense to look at anyone who's been negatively affected by a GCF project. This is a separate website because we have this independent redress mechanism. Now, the GCF website itself, the Green Climate Fund's website, I wanted to just show that you can specifically look at a country and find any of the projects that have happened in that country. So I think obviously today we should go to Nigeria. And as we're looking here, so we've gone to projects and programs, we've gone to countries, we've gone to Nigeria, we're able to scroll down and see what has happened in terms of the GCF. We see that there have been 9 projects. Some of these may be taking place in multiple countries. We'll look at that for the receipt of almost $120 million. And that there's readiness activities, which are activities undertaken at the government level, usually by the national designated authority, to do various activities to help prepare and oversee funding proposals, engage stakeholders, and generally understand where the possibilities are for getting the finance needed. So we can see right now, these are all of the individual projects. They each have numbers, the funding proposal number of the project. And these are multiple country projects, so they're not specific only to Nigeria. The other thing to remember with multiple country projects is sometimes they might not happen at all in that particular country, because when those programs are submitted, when all of these are submitted, they provide an indicative list of countries, and we still have to wait for implementation to happen. So there's been no project that's only happening in Nigeria and nowhere else. There are many projects that are happening. I'm going to go to one that's slightly older. We see it's an adaptation project that was approved back in 2018. We can see that it's been under implementation since 2019 and that it's receiving funding. And we can see that it's happening in 4 countries. I know that it is active in Nigeria. It's a private sector project. It's a small size project in the overall scheme of the GCF, which sometimes has projects that are worth $200 or $300 million. And here's the contact information for the accredited entity who should be able to answer any questions about the project beyond the available documentation, which is the approved funding proposal, the gender assessment and gender action plan that were part of that approved funding proposal. This is a particular case study. I actually haven't seen a case study before as a document. I'm interested to open this later and find out what's here. and then the most recent performance report to understand how it's actually been implemented on the ground. And this would provide the most key information of really understanding this project. There's much more information, obviously, on the GCF website, but I did want to also just point out that another way of accessing projects is going to the list of projects, and that can be sorted in various ways by the type or result area in order to better understand where the projects are happening and what's going on with them. So I just wanted to briefly go back to the last page of this presentation, and then actually, I believe maybe that was the last page. Usually I put my email address at the beginning and at the end, and it looks like I put it at the very beginning today. So if you have any questions directly that I don't have a chance to answer during our question and answer session, that is my email address. So I'm going to stop sharing with that and turn it back over to the facilitator for the next section. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tara, for the wonderful presentation. We've actually learned a lot, and we can now interact well with the GCF processes. All right, I will be sharing the agenda so that we can. Okay, next on the agenda is questions and comments, and that would be open for all participants. Please kindly fill the attendance form in the chat box so that the presentation can be shared with all participants after the training. So if you have comments or questions as regards the presentation, please kindly raise your virtual hand while I allow you to ask questions. Please kindly raise your virtual hand if you have questions or comments. Okay, we have someone raising her hand. Okay, Mrs. Oliko, I would invite you to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Tara, well done for a great presentation. I can really say the things are opening up daily on a daily basis. Yes, I learned a lot from your presentation, Tara. Mine is just a comment. I could see from one slide you said it was said the observers are not officially recognized by GCF. I don't know if I'm right, but I know I saw something like that. I don't know. Anyway, you correct my impression if I'm wrong. That observers are not officially recognized by the GCF. Can you just throw more light on that? And does it really? So what are they? I don't know if they are not really, but we saw further down in the presentation that even though not recognized, they are not even allowed to speak. Please, I want you to throw more light on that. Not really recognized. So what are the benefits of being an observer, if I may put it as plain as that? Thank you very much. That is my question.
Yeah, I'm really happy to answer that. And I also do see that we have a question in the chat as well that I will answer after. So the GCF has active observers, and that is a role that is filled by individuals that are elected by other observers to the GCF. We have an active observer for developing countries and an active observer for developed countries. These observers are officially part of the GCF and they sit at board meetings, but whereas the 24 country board members of the board meeting can raise their hand and be called on by the co-chairs to speak at any time, the active observers should have that same right. They should be able to always speak. Sometimes the co-chairs don't call on the active observers until after a decision has been taken by the board. The active observers are non-voting participants in the board meetings. This is, however, a lot more visibility and voice and an ability to influence and advocate in a decision-making space than we often see. If we think, for example, about something like the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change negotiations, in individual negotiation rooms, not plenary, but in individual negotiation rooms, there's not necessarily the opportunity for folks to speak who are civil society observers. So this is a big decision-making space where at the board meeting, they're deciding how to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, often allocating $1 billion at a board meeting. And so it is a great space to be able for the active observers to speak. We also have the ability to be present at technical sessions, asking questions directly of the accredited entities that are bringing forth proposals, and have opportunities to provide input on various submission processes, and are sometimes reached out to as the observer network for opportunities that might not be public and open to everyone. Now, the active observers, these two individuals that can speak when called on at the board meetings, coordinate everything they say through the GCF Observer Network so that whatever they say is an agreed upon statement that anyone who wants to participate in forming through the GCF Observer Network can do, because we will have an agenda for the meeting ahead of time and we'll know what can be said. Just like board members, though, we decided that that's a lot that's put on for these 4-day board meetings on active observers, and that they shouldn't have to coordinate everyone in the network. So we have alternate active observers, and that is something that we've done kind of outside of the system. But now the GCF board expects it and recognizes it informally, even though we don't have it written. They know that we have alternates, 2 alternates per position, so that there's an overall team of 6. The other piece of this is who participates in the GCF Observer Network. Now, the GCF has civil society observer organizations that can be accredited as observer organizations. And they have to say why they want to follow the GCF. They have to provide information about how their organization is set up legally and financially. And then there is that list of all of those observers. But because this is the observer network of civil society, indigenous peoples, and local communities, and we want to act inclusively, we don't limit participation to just those observer organizations. And I would also say that it's important that only those official accredited organizations, though, can vote on who the active observer is. That's, the system that the GCF has set up. So here's a list that I'm putting in the chat right now of every observer organization. But observers are a clear part of the GCF. And I think there's a lot of benefit to at least becoming a part of the observer network and following the listserv, because you will have access to information about what's happening with the GCF in a different way than just visiting the GCF website, because the active observers, anything that the GCF sends them in their official capacity as active observers, any email, anything that they are sent, they forward to the entire listserv so that we can all consider it. All right, so I hope that answers your question. Does that help get to these issues of what's informal and what's official, and how the observers work?
Yeah, thank you very much. It has helped. Thank you.
All right, I'd love to take up the question then that was put into the chat by Glory that says, does the GCF fund individual organization projects or only country projects? So the GCF funds projects by individual organizations. These individual organizations, though, have to go through a years-long process, several years long, to become accredited entities. It's only once they are accredited that entities can submit a funding proposal for approval by the board for a project. But the project, before it goes to the board for approval, has to be approved by each country's nationally designated authority, which is usually a Ministry of Environment or a Ministry of Finance that liaises with the GCF and has to say, yes, we agree and approve that this project could take place in our country. The GCF serves the Paris Agreement. It focuses on providing support to developing countries. So the reason that and with a particular emphasis on LDCs, Africa, and SIDS. So one of the reasons that it organizes projects by country is that it allows it to see whether or not it's meeting its goals of allocating funding appropriately to LDCs, Africa, and SIDS. And just because it provides a useful geographic way of looking at projects. Just because a project takes place in a country doesn't mean that it is taking place throughout the entire country. These funding proposals and these projects are incredibly complicated because they are millions of dollars, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. And within that proposal information is where you will find exactly the region, what particular counties or districts the project will be taking place. I hope that answers your question, Glory. All right, so the other I think thing that comes up with this, because I don't see any other questions, and so thought I might just add a little bit more, is this idea of being part of a multi-country project. Means that sometimes there is a lot less information on what the actual project in your country will be. When you are a part of larger programs that contain sub-projects, sometimes those larger programs don't even have to say whether the sub-project is a solar project or an agroecology project. They don't have to specify what kind of project that is. They just have to say, we might be doing a project we don't know yet in your country. Other multi-country projects are actual projects and not programs. And the Acumen Fund, I believe, was one of those, so that it would list, I'd have to open up those particular documents. It was approved many years ago and I don't quite remember, but it would talk about within these specific 4 countries where it would be working and its plans for working. Are there any other questions?
All right. Please, if you have any comments or questions, kindly raise your virtual hand before we move to the next thing on the agenda. Okay. I think we are all clear on GCF processes. And next on the agenda, we have recommendations and closing, which is to be taken by Mr. Alao Abiodun.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Daniels, for taking us through that wonderful session this evening, or depending on your time zone. And we are indeed grateful for giving us this insightful expose into the GCF Observer Network. And I believe our participants who have joined from various regions across Nigeria and by extension other countries too, would also have insight to what has been taught today. And so going forward, the take home is for us to get back to our respective areas and also, learn more from what has been taught, because we'll be sharing the slides with everyone after today's program. So I believe you all learned the 6 principles that was earlier stated, which is solidarity, elevating voices, transparency, inclusivity, independence, and also egalitarianism. So all of these principles have been elaborated upon by our guest speaker who took us through the section today. And also, we also thought about the 3 sectoral guides that is currently being moderated, and the input is due for March 4, 2022. These sectoral guides are focused on water security, health and well-being, low emission transports. So as an organization, we've worked on the summary of this report, and I believe maybe some persons must have seen this summary in the past weeks. So we would like to thank everyone who has joined from various regions or various parts of the country for today's program. And this is the second edition of this this monthly capacity training, because we have held the first edition in January, and we are talking through the rudiment of climate finance. So this session is talking about CSO engagement with the Green Climate Fund processes and how we can also actualize this here in Nigeria. And so going forward, by next month, we also have another seasoned speakers who will also join the session to also take us through other aspects of climate finance that we have been discussing since the beginning of the year. So we want to thank everyone once again on behalf of the Executive Director of the Center for 21st Century Issues, Ms. Titulope Ngozi Acosta, who is also in this session with us. She has asked me to also appreciate everyone, and our speaker especially, who has taken a time out of our schedule to ensure that we have a good session today. So going forward, we look forward to more sessions too, where we'll be trained on climate finance and how to engage the GCF processes here in Nigeria. So I would like to hand over back to the host, who will wrap up the session. And in case you do not have a full understanding of what has been taught today, you rest assured that you will get the slides. And when you get the slides, you peruse through them, check the GCF website too, and that we will also share in the slides too. And also look forward to our newsletter that will be coming out by the end of February, where we will also give a summary of all our activities too, as it pertains to climate finance. Let me also use this opportunity to also remind us, or to also inform us that we have an advocacy hashtag that we have been trending since the build up to COP26, which was held last year in Glasgow. And the hashtag is called Women for Climate Finance. The essential aspect of the hashtag is to advocate for finance for women so that they can also be recognized in the activities of climate financing. So that is just basically what we are doing on, and we look forward to more sessions with you guys too. So thank you very much. I'll hand over to the host so that we can have more deliberation as we go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lao, for the wonderful speech. Like Mr. Lao mentioned, this is a monthly capacity building, and
Okay.
we'll be having the next edition next month, the month of March. So kindly look forward to the presentation for today's training, and also please kindly fill the attendance form. The link is in the chat box so that we would send the presentation slides to you. I want to appreciate everybody for taking out the time to participate in today's training, and we look forward to more seasoned speakers coming to take the training for the subsequent months. Thank you so much. We've come to the end of the meeting here. Bye.